Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. Today, we're going to be talking about the EPA and how the federal regulations could be and will be impacting the state of Wyoming. Joining me now is Isaac Orr with Always On Energy Research. Isaac, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Mike. I'm doing great.
Isaac, obviously, the EPA and what it does around the state of Wyoming, given the fact of so much mining, so much coal, it's a big deal in the state of Wyoming, pays a lots of bills. How is the EPA, or what is the EPA doing that is going to impact the state of Wyoming?
Well, they're basically doing everything they can to impact the state of Wyoming. So the Biden administration has used the Environmental Protection Agency to come up with a whole suite of power plant rules. Each of them will reduce the market share for Wyoming coal, essentially. So the biggest one among those is the emissions on carbon dioxide emissions from existing coal-fired power plants. But they're also doing a whole suite of other things. They're using the mercury and air toxic standards to also essentially what the Biden administration is doing is they're throwing the kitchen sink at the coal fleet. And they are hoping that as they pile these straws onto the back of the camel, that if one regulation doesn't break it, another one will. So it is a, whole of government approach to, trying to take out the coal fleet. And unfortunately, that means bad things for the people of Wyoming.
So how long has this been going on from the Biden administration? Has it been since day one? Is it more recently in the latter half of the administration?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been day one. So the Trump administration had implemented a regulation called the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, or the ACE rule. Basically, they said, well, all you need to do is make reasonable tune-ups to your coal plant in order to reduce their emissions, improve the heat rate, that sort of stuff, nerd stuff. But ultimately, they were tweaks that would allow the coal plants to have some certainty in their operations moving forward. And then day one, basically, the Biden administration said, we are going to undo all of that. And then they began basically piling on these extra regulations. You had the coal combustion and residuals rule, effluent limitations guidelines. There's a whole bunch of stuff that EPA has done to, weaken the coal fleet one plant at a time.
And what can states like Wyoming that rely on mining and selling coal do to push back?
Well, they've been suing. So the state of North Dakota, we've worked with them pretty closely with the Attorney General's office and the Transmission Authority. They're suing EPA saying, these regulations are unreasonable, they're arbitrary, and they are going to have a huge negative impact not only on coal producing regions, but the people that rely on those power plants. And that's one of the things that our research has demonstrated. And I can jump into that now, or we can get into that later. But essentially, we looked at the impact of the regulations on CO2 in the Mid-Continent Independent Systems Operator. That's MISO. That's a 15-state regional power grid that reaches from Minnesota to Mississippi, and also Southwest Power Pool, which is the grid that's just to the east of Wyoming. It goes from North Dakota to New Mexico. And these power plant regulations, shutting down the coal fleet is going to cause massive rolling blackouts because the EPA just thinks that you can replace a coal plant with some wind turbines, some solar panels, and some battery storage facilities and get that same reliability value. But that's just not the case, Mike.
And so, Isaac, when is the soonest that a coal-fired power plant would have to be shut down, and then as a result of that, possibly rolling blackouts?
Yeah, so we're looking at the 2032 to 2035 timeframe for that. So EPA never does anything easily. So they say if you want to run your power plant, your coal plant past 2040, you need to install carbon capture and sequestration equipment on that power plant and capture 90% of the CO2 that comes out of the stack. But they say if you want to shut your power plant down before 2032, you don't need to make any changes. You can basically run the plant as normal. So what EPA is trying to do, they're trying to have a chilling effect on the market. They're trying to scare coal plant owners out of actually upgrading their facilities because the coal plant owners aren't stupid. They know that if EPA doesn't get them on the CCS, they're going to try to get them on the 4 or 5 other regulations that I already mentioned. So you could see power plants, coal-fired power plants using Wyoming coal shut down in the early 2030s as a result of this, if not sooner, because what we're also seeing at Always On Energy Research is a lot of these companies are not properly maintaining their coal plants because they understand that they're not going to be able to have them in the long run. So they're skimping on scheduled maintenance, and that is causing them to run less efficiently. And that's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, unfortunately.
So let's say there is a change in the White House come November, really January. What would that do to impact this?
I think that the Trump administration is going to be very aggressive in repealing these or trying to repeal these regulations. We also got a few wins at the Supreme Court recently that limit the ability of EPA to interpret the laws, basically. So, what EPA does, they don't say, oh, we have this clearly defined congressional mandate. Congress hasn't told us to regulate CO2. That hasn't happened. So, what they do is they bury through like all of the provisions of the Clean Air Act, and they look for something that they can exploit and make into a huge regulation, even though that's not what Congress actually told them to do. So we have, kind of a runaway bureaucracy. Some people call it the swamp, some people call it the deep state, whatever you want to call it. These unelected bureaucrats are making a lot of policy decisions that would be better left to Congress. And thankfully, the Supreme Court basically said that. They said that there needs to be less deference given to the agencies.
So if things do move in the direction they appear to be heading in right now with the EPA and with the
Yep.
coal-fired power plants there in Wyoming, what's this going to do to the economy of the state, you think?
It's not going to be good, Mike. So not only is EPA trying to kill the coal industry, they're also trying to make it more difficult to use natural gas. And Wyoming is also a natural gas producer. So essentially what EPA is trying to do is trying to force us into this, all wind and solar grid. And, they say things, they pay lip service to carbon capture and sequestration, but that really hasn't been demonstrated on the scale that EPA pretends that it has. And EPA pretends that we're going to have green hydrogen at some point in the future, which is also another boondoggle. We could do a whole episode on that by itself. So EPA is basically making us very dependent on the whims of the weather. And, there are such things as wind droughts. You can have times where the wind's not blowing. So every plant is kind of rated on a percentage, Mike, and it's called the capacity factor. It's nerd speak, but essentially, what percentage of your potential output are you actually producing right now? In a coal plant, that can go up to 80, 90, 100%. You just have to burn more coal. But wind and solar basically are dependent on whether it's windy or it's sunny. And we've seen in just looking at the historical data, 80-hour wind droughts in the MISO region where the wind is operating below 10% of its potential output. And for 42 straight hours, it was operating below 1.5% of its potential output. So we have an administration that wants us all to heat our homes with electricity, get rid of the natural gas that we use for that, get rid of the oil or the gasoline powered cars that we have, and charge our electric cars. That's almost always going to happen at night when the sun's not shining. So it is a recipe for energy scarcity moving forward.
Isaac, I saw in DC, in California a parking lot for EV chargers. There were probably maybe 40, 50, maybe even 200, and it was basically powered by diesel. How can that be? And where's the logic there, Isaac?
I don't know if there's a lot of logic that goes into any of this, Mike, but as they make the grid less reliable, they're going to have to find workarounds like that. Otherwise, they kind of jeopardize their other policy objectives, which are force everybody into an electric vehicle, especially in California. They're not even going to let you buy a new internal combustion engine after, was it 2035? So California is getting ahead of its skis on a lot of this stuff, and reality is going to come crashing down. It's just a question of whether how painful it's going to be and whether they actually learn the lessons that Europe is learning right now. And I don't think they will.
And speaking of the lessons Europe has learned and is dealing with right now, can you tell us about a couple of those?
Yeah, I mean, Germany is a basket case. Their electricity prices are some of the highest in the world. And a lot of it's because they've tried to go this wind and solar route and they shut down their nuclear power plants. So Germany also banned fracking, even though they have natural gas deposits. So they became very reliant on Russian natural gas piped in. And once the war in Ukraine started, then they wanted to show that they were part of the good team and reduce the amount of natural gas that they were buying. But they had no real options, so the price spiked. Germany actually had to turn a whole bunch of coal plants back online in order to prevent the blackouts. So since then, they've built a bunch of liquefied natural gas terminals so they can import natural gas from the United States. I mean, ultimately, when you try to so the electric grid is not a battery, and I don't think a lot of people understand that. When you unplug a light, the light disappears instantaneously. So electricity is consumed at the exact second that it is generated, and there's no storage device. I used to think of the grid as a giant bathtub that kind of filled with electricity from wind and solar, and you could just empty it when you needed it. That's not how it works. It's either there or it isn't. So we have a lifestyle that is more dependent on always available electricity, but we are also shifting to a grid that is more and more unable to fulfill that. And batteries are not a realistic solution because they're so expensive.
Good point. All right, Isaac, I appreciate your time. If people want to learn more about the research and that you do and your organization does, where can they find that?
Yeah, they can go to aoenergy.org, or they can check out our Substack. We write a new piece every week at Energy Bad Boys.
Energy Bad Boys. Okay, so if people want to learn more about what's happening around the state of Wyoming, just go to wyliberty.org and sign up for our newsletter. Isaac, thanks again.
Thanks, Mike.